Hello, and welcome to the Adapt Daily podcast. Today on the show, I have Kristi Soomer. Kristi, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm excited too, because we are going to talk about conscious, sustainable fashion. I've known Kristi for, I feel like a few years now. She's the CEO of Encircled, which is a really cool, it's a slow fashion brand that really does it all. It creates modern, versatile essentials for women from earth-friendly materials that are beautifully soft, high quality, and good for the planet. And I actually still have one of their blazers that I got years ago, and it's my favorite go-to. And they really do, you really honor your mission of being versatile clothing. And I guess that kind of fits into what we're going to talk about today. But first, I always ask my guests the same single question to start, which was when or what was the last problem that you had to solve? Whether it be today or this week or this past year, if you don't have very many problems and you have to search back.
I got a lot of problems. Entrepreneurship is like a daily firefighting exercise, I'm sure, as you know. Not always daily, but definitely in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of challenges with supply chain and HR and marketing and digital marketing, all kinds of stuff. The last problem I had, right now we're going through reviews. So we're going through performance reviews and have all kinds of stuff, right? And I'm not an HR expert. So when people have questions for me, I'm like, Google, like, or I'm emailing my friends in HR trying to figure it out, because like, that's the hard part of running a business with a team is you don't know all the answers sometimes. And employees sometimes want an answer right there. And you have to be like, I need to like look into this. I don't know.
Totally. And that's the beautiful thing about community and sort of online communities. I know you run a really awesome Facebook group, for entrepreneurs and things like that. And I think if one of the blessings out of COVID has been that we've all become super Zoom tech savvy, Facebook group, all that jazz. So yes, I'm there with you as it relates to everyday problems. Now, I was reading more about the company just to kind of research before our conversation. And I remember reading Encircled embraces transparency in its entire business in an industry that is notorious for secrecy. So when did you realize that the fashion industry was secretive, corruptive, all these kind of negative words? When did that hit you?
Yeah, you know what? My first job out of school was actually at a lingerie retailer in their operations office, but I was not really exposed to their supply chain at all. So I wasn't even thinking at that point about like what goes into manufacturing underwear. Like it never even entered my mind, which I think is very common for a lot of people when they're buying clothing. They just assume somebody's making it somewhere from something. And you just assume that, hopefully that person's getting paid well. And ideally these materials are good for me and not going to harm my body or the planet. However, what we've seen over the last definitely last 5 years, increased transparency and understanding what goes into some of these fabrics, and also that there's still a lot of exploitation in the supply chain of labor globally for fashion, especially fueled by fast fashion by brands like Shein and Zara and H&M and stuff like that. So I think my first exposure to it, I started Encircled in late 2012. So we're coming up on our 9th anniversary. And I started as a side hustle. So I was working in consulting at the time and I was traveling a lot and I was on the ferry. Torontonians will know what that is, to the airport. Back in the day, they used to have a ferry that went 2 minutes across the water to the airport. Now there's a tunnel. And I overheard a conversation about Joe Fresh. I guess they worked there. And it was right around the time of the Rana Plaza factory collapse. So I'd already started Encircled. And we already had a deep embedded mission of local and sustainable and ethical, just generally, it felt like something I was propelled to do. And when I overheard that conversation, which I probably wasn't supposed to hear, and it was talking about how to like minimize the PR impact on the brand. And for anyone not familiar with that incident, it was at a factory in Bangladesh that produced a lot of garments for brands like Joe Fresh, Primark, and other brands in the UK. And 1,200 people lost their lives that day, amongst thousands were injured. And it just hit me like, that's their concern. Like, that's the number one concern, is how is this going to make our brand look? And it just made me think, like, I don't want to be in an industry, I wasn't consulting for them, but I was consulting with similar brands. And I'm like, I don't want to be in an industry where I'm helping brands like this save money and get better and fire people and optimize costs, because at what cost is that happening? And it's usually the cost of somebody down the line in the production or supply chain or the planet. So that really reaffirmed to me that I want to be more aligned with the values where I'm doing my work, essentially.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of leads into, you sort of already answered my next question, which I was going to ask, what is the biggest point that really disturbs you as it relates to the fast fashion industry? I didn't really know, to be completely honest. Is it the fabrics in the sense of they're, polluting the earth, or is it that when they touch our bodies, they're really super, super harmful and toxic to us? Or is it more of that people element? Like, if you could choose one thing that just absolutely irks you the most, what would it be?
I think I would have to say, like, there's so many elements of fashion that are not great, fast fashion particularly. But the one that I have to always circle back to is overconsumption. And I think that's an overproducing. And that's just fast fashion's business model in general, is to produce the trendiest items as quickly as possible. They can copy it off the runways. They don't operate on seasons, years ago, decades ago, there used to be fashion seasons. So you'd have fall, winter, you'd have resort, you might have spring, summer. Sometimes there'd be 5. Now there's like a million seasons. So like Shein launches apparently 1,000 items a day of new styles. Like, that was never a thing. So you just have to think about like how those are made, the quality, the fit, the fabric material, let alone the fact that like the sustainability is probably completely ignored in that. It's just a huge volume of product, just not made very well. That's probably designed to fall apart, and probably isn't very comfortable because they're using cheap materials, and also they're exploiting labor to do so. So it's like that whole piece of overconsumption, I think, is driving that, because people want this like latest and greatest, and that's part responsibility of the media as well, fueling that too. But that's like something where, we often come up against in sustainable fashion, like sustainable fashion is too expensive. It's something we hear all the time. And I agree, it's way more expensive than a fast fashion t-shirt. And there's definitely reasons for that, because our whole supply chain costs 10 to 20, sometimes 30 times more. And we try not to pass that along to a consumer, but at the end of the day, you have to build a business to make some profit to keep going. And why I come back to that is because the mentality is more is more, is I think what's really driving a lot of that. And that's like it's a very North American mentality, like US and Canada, and some other countries just want the latest and greatest of everything. And there's no longevity built into things anymore. Even when you look at tech, which is completely out of scope for me, but you buy like, headphones and they like fall apart a year later. And you're like, well, where do these go? They don't go anywhere because they're plastics. So like they sit in a landfill forever. So I think there's a huge issue with like that whole mentality around buying stuff and not making it to last generally.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm guilty for that. Maybe not so much in fashion, but just generally. I mean, I didn't really realize it until this past year. Now I live with someone and I'm in a relationship, and he'll make sort of fun of me saying like, oh my God, the never enough culture. Right. And I didn't even realize that I had that sort of exactly almost like this never enough kind of, need more. But coming back to fashion, it's interesting. My boyfriend is a fashion designer, and he's very like, has like 7 shirts total. It very much respects the like fall, winter, summer, like, you know what I mean? And so you'd think that someone in fashion just, I was so surprised of how little he had. And he's more of, kind of like, no, I have a couple pieces and I wear them really well. He's also very humble. But I think that sort of, I now have this new perspective on like, oh, being fashionable doesn't mean having the latest and greatest. It actually is kind of more of the opposite. And so that's sort of one of the steps that Encircled is taking, obviously helping make each piece really, you know, versatile. What are the other steps that you're taking in the sense of doing things differently?
Yeah. So number one, we make everything locally in Toronto, Canada, which 99% of brands do not make their clothing in Canada anymore. So that in itself is very rare. In the US, it's more prevalent, maybe more like 5% of apparel worn in the US is made there, but it's still very low. Majority of apparel production is done overseas, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as people are being treated fairly. And notoriously, most people are not being paid living wages overseas. So that's a huge issue. So that's like something really important to us. So all of our factories are within, I think the closest one is Hamilton, which you'll be familiar with, you know, so that's about 45 kilometers from our office versus like, you know, Bangladesh is like 10,000 kilometers away. So there's a huge carbon footprint for making clothing, you know, overseas and bringing it in, whether it's by freight or air, and then, you know, selling it here for people here. So there's definitely some benefits to that. We also knit like about 50% of our fabric locally and dye it locally as well. And 100% of our fabrics have naturally derived sustainable attributes to them. So we're all focused on, you know, harm-free fabrics. So, you know, the chemicals have been certified that are used in the processing to be safe for your skin, because there are a lot of chemicals in fabrics. And the people making them are safe in the process of making them as well. You know, something else we're really focused on is circularity. So we do actually collect all production cuttings of fabric at our factories. We keep them, we upcycle a lot of them into actual accessories. So we're trying to find a higher value use for them. And then whatever we can't find a use for, we responsibly recycle, because a lot of that in the fashion industry goes right into landfill. And that also generally just sits there. And if there's a better and higher use for it, we're like all for it. But at the end of the day, like we're really designing with that idea of less is more. So we're trying to create these timeless, well-made pieces that you can wash and wear and feel really great in, because the most wasteful thing is to not wear your closet. Like, you know, to spend resources and money and time on things. And trust me, I'm not saying this from like a judgmental place, because I used to be there too. When I was in my 20s, I was like a fashion horse. I'd go into like Winners when I was at Western. I'd spend my whole day there instead of going to class, and I'd buy all this stuff. It would sit in my closet. There'd be tags on it. Never wear it. So wasteful, right? So even if you are buying fast fashion, if that's all you can afford right now, like at least wear it. Like wear it a lot. Like try and get utility out of your clothing, because that's where you're actually getting the value. So that's something that we design into all of our products, and we take a lot of time to perfect the fit of those products, so that when somebody wears them, they're going to want to wear them all the time, because they feel amazing and they feel flattering and comfortable and confident in them. And it's surprising a lot of fashion brands don't do that. They don't even, a lot of fast fashion brands never fit a garment on a person before they produce it, which in my experience is very dangerous, because you can't just design off of like a technical measurement. You need to actually see it on a body. And I'm sure you know from your partner being in fashion, it's just very wasteful. And then you end up with a lot of clothing. They're just hoping you're going to throw it out if it doesn't fit, because it's so cheap, right? Whereas like we'd rather you keep it and love it and really want to honor it. The proudest thing for me is like we have a bunch of customers. We just relaunched our V-neck in January, and they'd had our original V-neck for like 6 years, 7 years, and it still looks good. And so I'm like, that is amazing to me, that they can, you know, wash and wear this and it's not falling apart. It's built to last. And that's really where I see the future of fashion going, I think.
Totally. And as someone that moves literally every 3 months and is currently in Mexico, and who knows where I'll be next year, I've definitely had that firsthand of realizing how much shit I have, and like really just, okay, let's pick out the pieces that I can rewear that will continue to look good. You mentioned around, you know, that you should be able to wash your clothes. Is there any particular tips in the sense of, or anything that we should know that a lot of us are doing wrong? Like, is it okay to just standard wash and then dry clothing, or do you have some hack for us.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest hack is like cold water is always best. There's
Yeah.
so many detergents out there now that are like eco-friendly,
Yeah.
that are gentler on your clothing. There's a lot of fragrance allergies out there that people have from detergents because they use
Yeah.
really high fragrant, not even essential oils. These are like
Oh
toxic
yeah.
fragrances. So you really want to
Totally.
find like a good detergent, and definitely worthwhile getting some detergent like a Woolite or something like that for like more delicate items.
Okay.
The biggest mistake people probably make is, well, there's two. I would say in the washing machine, not protecting their clothing.
Mhm.
So if something is like being put in a wash with like jeans or something with zippers or anything that can catch, like make sure you're putting it in a wash bag,
Mhm.
so that it's not going to get snagged, because just
Mhm.
that friction of being in there can cause pilling or snags or anything like that to happen.
Mhm.
And then I would say the dryer, everybody in Canada and the US loves their dryers, and dryers are so hard on fabrics because a lot of fabrics, if you think about it, have four-way stretch in them. And
Yeah.
stretch is essentially elastic or lycra. You put it in the dryer all the time, it's heating it up, it's actually melting the elastic, and
Yeah.
then it's, creating weakness in that structure. So for anybody who's ever had like, I don't know, a pair of stretch skinny jeans just rip, that's why, because they've been like overheated and then the fabric integrity breaks down. And it can also accelerate pilling and obviously warp the garment as well, because not every fabric will dry properly. It might actually cause it, depending on how it's made, also that to warp and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
we always recommend to skip the dryer if you can. I know for some things, for socks and underwear, it may totally make sense, but I would recommend for like leggings or like anything with stretch in it, any sort of t-shirts and stuff like that, if you can hang them to dry, it's also better for the planet to not use that
Totally.
electricity as well. But
Totally.
that's a big one, I think, that people put everything in the dryer and then they're like, well, but this came out like this, and I'm like, well, obviously it's not polyester, it's going to change shape, like, so we try and do a lot of education on that as much as we can, but it is one of those habits that just needs to be broken.
Totally. Oh my goodness. I'm with you there. We have to put in our clothing to a place that does our washing and drying, just because we're always traveling. And yes, literally I now know, I do not speak any Spanish, but I now know how to say like, please sun dry, do not put in dryer for that very reason. There's a
Yeah,
couple things I know how
yeah.
to say in Spanish, and that's one of them. Um, what are your favorite fabrics to use? I mean, I think when we think of like conscious or sustainable fashion, automatically I just think organic cotton, because that seems to be what
Mhm.
everyone talks about. Is that the one, or are there others that you really like using in Encircled or for yourself, just so that when we're shopping and
Mhm.
we look at tags, like what are the fabrics where we can be like, yeah, this will last, this is good.
Mhm. Yeah, organic cotton's nice. We don't use a ton of it at Encircle. We have some pieces with it. You have to make sure it's certified. That's important, so that it will be free of chemicals, because cotton has a lot of chemicals used in processing. A lot of pesticides and herbicides are used on cotton. It's like one of the top polluting crops. So I always make sure, just because it says organic, make sure like it's got some certification, like GOT certified or something like that. But
Yeah.
cotton generally is very resilient fiber. So that's a big pro on it, but it does read very casual. So it's
Yeah.
not always like the best fabric, I think. We use a lot of Tencel lyocell and a lot of Tencel modal. They're both like cellulose regenerative fabrics. So Tencel particularly is a closed loop manufacturing process. So what it means is this fiber is created from eucalyptus pulp. It's transformed using some solvents in that process, and they're kept within the processing. So there are no wastewater or anything is re-emitted back into the environment. It uses very little water to create, which is a huge benefit over cotton. Cotton uses a lot of fresh water to create, and that water is recycled, and it's very efficient. So it's a really beautiful fiber. It almost feels like silk. You can see different iterations of Tencel. Like I have sheets that are made from Tencel, and they're very like, they feel cool to the touch.
Yeah.
It's a really neat fiber, super resilient, very breathable. We use it in our Evolve top, and it's got nice drape, and it's just
Yeah.
washes and wears really well. Modal is like kind of that, it's like Tencel. It's a little bit more processed because it's softer hand feel, also very eco-conscious. As long as it's certified to be sustainably sourced, that's really important. And that one feels like a dream cloud. That's all I can say. Like it feels like you're
I
like,
want it.
and we do in-person events, which we haven't done in a really long time, but we'll touch the rack and just be like, oh, that's amazing. And that's the only experience you can get when you like in person. Like online, it's so hard to communicate that, but it feels like butter, like little soft butter, fuzzy butter against your skin. So that's one of our favorites to work with because it can be easy to dress up or down. It's so comfortable. It's so soft, also very resilient. So those are two I love. And I think linen's great for the summer. Like a nice linen blend top is super classic, and there's a lot of sustainability in linen as well. It's a very durable fiber too. So I'd say those are my like top three.
Amazing. And yeah, definitely linen. Is there a reason why linen is so darn expensive? Do you want to like back that up, or is it just like Tulum culture? Because whenever I go to the beach here and there's like, pop-ups of like, it's just like, oh yeah, I just want like a linen shirt. Oh, $300.
This is a funny one for me because maybe I'm going to get like threats after this, but I feel like I'm exposing something in the
expose it, girl. Expose anything to do with Tulum.
But linen is actually fairly affordable to buy as a fabric. So I've always been confounded as to why it's so expensive. I think it has a high consumer perception of value. So I think people just charge a lot for it. But like compared to something like merino wool is way more expensive. Even Tencel is more expensive than linen. So it's bizarre to me. It's definitely more expensive than cotton, but it's like not a premium. I don't consider it a super premium fiber like silk or anything like that. If that was made out of silk, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense because silk is expensive, or Cupro or something like that. But this linen is pretty reasonable cost wholesale. So I think it's just that people think it's very like high end, and you immediately like conjures up like the Hamptons or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's actually very reasonably priced. So
wow, that's so interesting. Because even in the herbal world, there are certain herbs that people just assume are very expensive and they're very cheap. And then there's certain herbs that you would assume that are cheap that are very expensive. So it's kind of, just that impact of marketing, right?
Yeah, I'd love to hear which ones those are. I feel like ashwagandha is up there because that ashwagandha is very cheap, right?
Ashwagandha used to be very cheap, and now it depends. Ashwagandha, if you get it in the way that it's usually grown in like sewage sludge, where you're putting actually more toxic into your body, it's very, very cheap. But then if you get it the right way, where it's sun dried and grown on a farm, it's incredibly expensive. But that's one of them. Goji berries, like very expensive. Everyone thinks reishi.
Goji berry is very expensive. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how that has its own supply chain too, that I don't really know that much about, but I take a lot of supplements. So I think about that a lot, to be honest.
Yeah. And definitely when you were talking about actually shipping the clothes in from Bangladesh, right? It just goes to show, wow, they must be so cheap if it's still cheaper to make them there and then ship them in, because I know that's for us, it's just like, we can't ship, it's like, if you're not in Canada or the States, like, sorry, you're not getting our product. It's just like so expensive. So it goes to show like, wow, they're clearly hardly getting paid anything if they can still make money on shipping them from so far.
Yeah.
Now, outside of fashion, what are some ways that you can suggest that we can act more consciously and respectfully towards our planet as well as fellow humans, whether it's something that you do or that you would like to do more of?
That's great. Yeah, I'm a big fan of being like an active participant. I think while it's really great to, use recycled straws and reusable bags and coffee mugs, I feel like we're at this point with the climate crisis where we need more people taking action, and that has to be at like a governmental level. I know that people don't like to hear that because it's like not the easy, sexy answer. But I think the more you can write.
Can't you just suggest beeswax wrap?
I use those and I love them. And I do think that use the beeswax wraps, and those little covers are made out of paper instead of whatever, plastic. Yes. But if you really want to do something, like start to get involved, whether it's with an organization locally or write to your governmental representatives and be a bit of a, noisy bee about it, because, there's brands like mine and a bunch of other brands. We're a certified B Corp. There's a huge amount of us now that are really pushing for change in the world in a positive way for our planet and the people who live here. But the reality is there's still like 99% of corporations are not B Corps. Most of them are profit motivated. Most of the pollution comes from oil and gas. So that really needs to change. Like there's a little bit of like environmental gaslighting, I feel like, happening from the government. They're like, yeah, we're banning plastic. And I'm like, yeah, but what about oil and gas? Like there's like that whole portion. So I feel like the more you can get educated and do some of your own activism in that respect, I think that is amazing. In terms of like being kind to other people, I mean, I think you've seen it throughout the pandemic. Like the more you can kind of connect with people and really try and see where they're at and be kind to them in the moment, people, you never know what people are going through. So I always challenge myself to do something kind once a day for somebody. It's really hard now because I don't see people all the time, but like I'm trying to figure out something every day where I'm like refocusing from myself onto somebody else, whether it's paying them a compliment or holding the door, buying somebody's coffee or picking somebody up from something or getting a grocery for my neighbor or something like that. I always challenge myself to do that because I think the world needs a little bit more kindness right now.
Totally. And it actually, I know that we shouldn't do it for this reason, but it actually feels really good. As I mentioned, I'm now in partnership, and at the beginning I was almost resisting, like, oh, but now I'm spending more time because I'm making him breakfast. And it was almost like I was fighting it. But as soon as you kind of embrace this more community mindset and kind of, I think for me, stepping out of Toronto, where I felt like I was kind of encouraged to be in that very individualistic, go mindset, and coming into more of a community culture. It's really nice. And yeah, luckily doing good things for other people feels good for yourself too. Yeah.
For sure. Selfishly, there's a benefit. It's been shown that like it actually like will increase like dopamine levels in your brain and stuff like that when you do nice things for other people.
It really does.
Benefit,
I almost feel guilty for it. Now, the last question I have kind of sinks into Adapt Daily, where we're all about adapting to the present reality. I'd be curious to know what's helping you with your resilience lately, whether it's your mental resilience, physical, emotional. Is there something that you're kind of leaning on, be it a product, a technique, a mindset that you feel like, oh, thank goodness, like I'm becoming more resilient?
Mm-hmm. I had this discussion the other day with this mastermind I'm part of with a bunch of female founders who are like super high performing. And we were like, can I swear on this podcast? I don't know. But we're like, fuck being resilient. We don't want to be resilient. Why do we have to be resilient? Like, why do we have to live these lives where we're resilient? So like, I have that in the back of my mind all the time, but I also realize we're in a society that forces us to lean on resilience, especially right now in a time that's very divisive, very, still very scary, I think, in a lot of ways for people. And there's a lot of stuff happening globally that is very stressful for everybody and threatening, I think, in a lot of ways. So, for me, I've had a bit of a challenging year with health. So I've really had to lean into mind-body connection, which is something that I think I like thought about. Like I've been doing yoga for like 20 years, but I don't think I ever really did yoga. Like I did yoga, like the Lululemon version of yoga, but I was not really connecting it. So a couple of things I highly, highly recommend. So number one is this workout called The Class by Taryn Toomey. It's like, have you heard of it?
Okay, Goop talks about The Class.
Oh, really? Yeah, this is something Goop would talk about. It is so weird, but you know what? I actually think it's been very transformative to healing what I've been going through. Because when you break the trust in your body, you need to feel stuff back in your body. You need to feel safe in your body again. And it's a lot of movement with yoga and like sometimes shouting and stuff like that and moving around. Like my neighbors probably think I'm nuts. But that has been really great. So I try and do one of those classes daily, whether it's even just a stretch class or something, just to get the body moving. Getting good sleep, super transformative. I don't think most of us get enough sleep or we don't get good quality sleep. I gave up alcohol maybe almost a year ago. That's been super transformative for me. And then supplements, like finding the right supplements to like support, not to plug your brand because I've used your brand in the past. I'm not currently using it, but I have, and I use some similar supplements that are in your brand. And I really do believe that like there are times when you need that supplementation, and there's times when I think you can get pushed towards like the pharmaceutical side of things when it's not necessarily required. So
Totally. And, you know, I think you make an amazing point in the sense of you really do have to listen to your body and also your intuition in the sense of, if anything, I feel like I've been kind of more pushed into sometimes overdoing it with wellness and supplements and natural remedies. And, you know, sometimes you kind of need to check in and be like, okay, do I need all of the, you know, do I need 12 pills at the end of every meal? Or do I need to just, you know, maybe add in an herb here and an herb there. So I really appreciate that you kind of, you know, tune into that and so you can detect it. Well, Kristi, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so happy that you came on the podcast. I definitely, you really instilled in me, you know, I want to go look in my wardrobe right now, actually, and see like the things that I don't wear so that I can, you know, maybe not go shopping and just go shopping in my wardrobe instead. And for those that are listening and want to learn more, where is the best place to go?
Yeah, so you can check out our website. It's encircled.ca, encircled.ca. We're also on Instagram at encircled_, and you can find me on Instagram at Kristi Soomer. I'd love to connect with you. So tag me if you're watching this or listening to this podcast. And if you have any questions on conscious fashion, feel free to reach out. Happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'll be sure to link those in the show notes as well.
Awesome.